are only targeting criminals around him, causing social and economic suffering.
A financial mess that just got worse. Zimbabwe's military is on the streets of the capital and its aging president is being held. We look at the implications for what was once Africa's biggest economy. Also on the program, Venezuela gets a breather. Russia restructures $3 billion of its debts. But will that be enough to keep Venezuela afloat? And we meet the young Turkish designer who's using digital technology to muscle her way onto Milan's highly competitive catwalks. Hello, I'm Azhar Sukri. This is Money Talks. Now, when you have to carry sacks of money to buy a loaf of bread, and when you and everyone you know is out of work, it's probably safe to assume that it won't be too long before there's a change in your country's ruling order. But still, the political crisis in Zimbabwe that quickly led to military intervention has taken many by surprise. Many now see the end of President Robert Mugabe's 37-year reign. Mmalegabe Motsepe looks at the economic turmoil that led to his downfall.
The sound of tanks breaks through the morning calm in the streets of Harare. Roads to Zimbabwe's government buildings are blocked. Soldiers and armored vehicles regulate traffic. All signs point to a coup, but the military denies it on national television after seizing the state broadcaster. Instead, it made it clear just who it's after.
Comrade R.G. Mugabe and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed. We are only targeting criminals around him, causing social and economic suffering in the country in order to bring them to justice.
93-year-old Robert Mugabe is celebrated by his people. His rallies have always gathered thousands of supporters who believe in his policies. But to the West, Mugabe is responsible for destroying what could have been a big growth engine for Africa. In 2 decades, Zimbabwe's economy has tumbled from what was dubbed the breadbasket of the region to a deadweight. International donors like the IMF and World Bank cut aid to Zimbabwe in 1999, blaming Mugabe's populist policies for the decline. Widespread corruption, sky-high unemployment, and inflation have held back wealth creation. Dollarization of the currency was the solution to curb hyperinflation in 2008. But now, the number of real dollar notes have dropped to unworkable levels, causing fears of another economic meltdown. Despite those concerns, Mugabe's cash-strapped government has pledged $153 million to upgrade its main airport. There are also plans to build a new high-tech research university. When completed, the $1 billion institution will bear Mugabe's name. Critics say these plans involve money the country doesn't have, that it's a matter of time before the economy implodes. But far from the political tug-of-war and economic turmoil, Zimbabweans long for one thing.
Throughout this situation, all we hope for is peace. We don't want to be disturbed in our daily work. We want to survive.
With a military intervention underway, their survival is running on borrowed time and borrowed money, but no clear path of where the country is heading. Mmalegabe Motsepe, TRT World.
And we can go live to Harare now. Derek Matyszak is a senior research consultant at the Institute for Security Studies. He joins us now. Derek, thank you very much indeed for joining us at what must be a fairly difficult time for people in Zimbabwe. Let's start by giving us a quick rundown of what it's like in Harare right now. Are things quite calm, or is there some tension in the air?
Things are remarkably calm. In fact, I ventured out of my house this morning about mid-morning. People were going about their business, having coffee in coffee shops. The children were off to school and people were going to work. And in fact, if you weren't aware of what had happened last night, you wouldn't know of the dramatic events. But if you venture into the central business district, then there's a very heavy military presence around all the key institutions of state.
Derek, give us an idea of some of the historical economic context behind this military intervention. What are the daily economic hardships that people face over there?
Well, we have a massive currency shortage at the moment. The difficulties have been caused by the fact that government's expenditure well exceeds its revenue. And they have been financing this revenue by the issuance of treasury bills or coupons. And when these bills mature, in order to avoid a default on the bills, they simply enter an electronic credit into the bank account of the bank holding those treasury bills. So in this way, government is effectively creating what we call cyber money. There's a credit in the bank which is not backed up by actual cash. So when depositors arrive at the bank to withdraw their money, they are told that they can only have electronic money or can only do electronic transfers. They can't access actual cash. So what's happened now is that there's a differential between electronic money and hard US dollars because the country dollarized in 2008, 2009. So what this effectively means is that the value of wages, and that would include the wages of members of the military, has plummeted in value because there's now a 65 to 70% premium on cash as opposed to electronic money.
Wow, that's a fascinating insight, Derek. Looking at the state of the economy, though, do you think that it was just a matter of time before the military intervened?
I don't think the military intervention has been primarily on account of the economy. The military intervention has been on account of the faction fighting and the succession battle that's taking place to succeed the 93-year-old President Robert Mugabe. And certainly it was the dismissal of the vice president of the country who was seen as a prime contender to succeed Mugabe. It was his dismissal. He had the support of the military, and the military has moved in basically to support the vice president's succession ambitions. Those succession struggles, though, have drawn attention away from the economy, and the regional countries do not seem to appreciate, and in fact, many Zimbabweans themselves do not seem to appreciate that the country is teetering on the brink of an economic meltdown and is on the verge of becoming a failed state.
Looking at the region, I'm glad you brought that up. Is there any possibility of there being any kind of a regional contagion from this?
Well, the regional contagion normally takes the form of Zimbabweans leaving the country in droves as economic refugees. And nobody knows the precise number, but the accepted wisdom is that there are about 3 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa as economic refugees. And if the present economic trajectory continues, we can expect another flood and another wave of Zimbabweans leaving the country to go to South Africa as economic refugees, and of course putting pressure on the South African government and the South African infrastructure.
Derek Matyszak, I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you ever so much for joining us from Harare. Derek Matyszak of the Institute for Security Studies there. Now, another emerging economy in crisis is Venezuela, of course, and Russia has just signed a deal to restructure $3 billion of Venezuela's debt. It gives Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro a much-needed lifeline, but it amounts to just a fraction of the country's debt. So estimates of how much Venezuela owes foreign investors range from $100 billion to $150 billion. About half of those debts are in the form of bonds, which rating agencies classify as junk because of the high and growing likelihood of the government defaulting on payments. And on Tuesday, Standard & Poor's said Venezuela is in what it described as a selective default. That happened after it failed to pay $200 million in coupon payments on 2 bonds. A full default could lead to foreign governments seizing overseas assets, mostly in the US, and that could make Venezuela's crisis even worse. Maduro's government is keenly aware of all of this, of course, and has promised to honour all its foreign debts, even though doing so has led to hyperinflation and shortages of food and medicine. The government met representatives of some of its foreign creditors this week and said, and I quote, "The process of refinancing Venezuela's foreign debt began with a resounding success," but some of those bondholders at the meeting reportedly said they're now even more confused as to how Venezuela plans to avoid a default. For more on this, let's go to Paris and join TRT World's editor-at-large, Craig Copetas. Welcome as always, Craig. Yes, there is quite an amazing situation in Venezuela as well. How much of that help that Russia is giving by restructuring $3 billion in debts, how much of that is really going to help Venezuela in the short term?
It's not going to help Venezuela at all. But let me assuage your confusion and the confusion of the markets. Look, this is the third time since last year that Russia has come to Venezuela's aid when Caracas has been in, financial trouble. All this lending to Venezuela is part of Russia's larger foreign policy plan to use the national oil company Rosneft to help achieve foreign policy objectives. This is not a story about money. This is a story about politics. The Russians have given Caracas in the neighborhood of $10 billion in financial assistance over the last year. Rosneft has a 49.9% stake in the Venezuelan state oil company's Citgo refining operation in Houston. Now, the political payout of this for Russia is huge, absolutely huge, because think of it as, you know how bonds work. The vultures come in when the price gets really low. How many pennies you're going to get on a dollar? It's almost to 20, and the vultures think they're going to come in. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. The bears are going to come in, the Russian bears. They're going to buy this debt, and then the Chinese are going to come in and they're going to do the same thing. It's a foreign policy move.
And there are some vulture funds hovering around looking to pick up bits of Venezuelan debt as well at this point. Let's talk about China for a second. It's also saying that it's confident that Venezuela is going to be able to pay its dues. Is it possible that they might come in with some help as well?
You could bet the $28 billion that the Venezuelans are in debt to China for, that they're going to come in and help out. These countries are looking for a toehold in the West as the American empire, as it has been known under Donald Trump, continues its wane in foreign policy circles. This is a perfect opportunity for these countries to increase their footprint. And the United States is somewhat hapless in being able to stop this trend. Listen, the Venezuelans are in for what? $150 billion is that what it is in outstanding payments? $150 billion? That's chump change in the diplomatic and geopolitical arena. I think this is completely a political machination that just happens to involve dollars and cents.
Indeed. Craig Copetas in Paris. Thank you so much. Still ahead here on Money Talks, Boeing and Airbus slug it out in the skies above Dubai for billions of dollars of aircraft orders. We'll tell you who's ahead in a moment. But first, a quick roundup of the other top business stories from around the world in 60 seconds. Crude oil prices fell almost 2% on forecasts of rising output in the US and slowing global demand. The US government expects shale oil production to rise for a 12th consecutive month in December. Meanwhile, the International Energy Agency delivered a surprisingly gloomy outlook for oil demand, cutting its forecast by 100,000 barrels per day for this year. Japan's economic growth slowed in the third quarter to 1.4% on an annualized basis from a 2.5% expansion in the previous 3 months. The third quarter figure was slightly faster than expectations. Consumer spending dipped during the period, but analysts expect the fall to be temporary. And Chinese tech giant Tencent says net profit surged by nearly 70% in the third quarter from a year earlier. Strong growth in advertising revenue in its mobile games and digital content divisions drove its earnings higher. Tencent is the world's largest video game publisher by revenue. Now, the battle of the plane makers is heating up in Dubai. The world's two biggest manufacturers are looking to break records at this year's air show after what's been a difficult couple of years for the industry. So far this year, European giant Airbus has been lagging behind its US rival Boeing in terms of orders. Now, Airbus went into the Dubai Air Show with 288 net orders, while Boeing had more than double that at 605. On Sunday, Boeing stole the headlines after it announced the sale of 40 of its wide-body 787-10s to state-owned carrier Emirates in a deal worth $15 billion. But then Airbus made a comeback. On Wednesday, it signed a deal to sell 430 of its short-haul A320neo planes to private equity firm Indigo Partners. The historic $50 billion deal will spread the jets across Indigo's subsidiaries, which include Frontier Airlines in the US, Mexico's Volaris, Europe's Wizz Air, and JetSmart of Chile. And a couple of hours later, though, its rival Boeing fired back with a $27 billion deal to sell 225 of its 737 MAX jets to discount carrier Fly Dubai. It's Boeing's biggest ever order from the Middle East for single-aisle passenger jets. And that brings its total tally for the year to 870. That compares to 718 for Airbus, which will need to bring in a couple of bigger deals by December if it hopes to catch up with its rivals. Let's get more on this now from aviation entrepreneur Fabrizio Polli, who joins me from Manchester. Great to have you on Money Talks as ever, Fabrizio. Now, we've been seeing this trend for a couple of years now of airlines moving towards smaller regional jets and away from the things like the A380 Super Jumbo. If you strip out the Emirates part of all of this, do you see this trend continuing?
Well, I mean, it's a continuous battle between Airbus and Boeing, and always has been, always will be. But I think the interesting thing is Airbus are a bit in difficulty with the A380 because it's been a bit of a flop. They were expecting a lot more airlines to order that aircraft. So I think what the guys at Indigo did, they saw an opportunity. They thought, you know, if we go in there now, we negotiate hard, we can get a massive discount on a lot of Airbus 320s. And they did the deal. A bit like what happened back just after September the 11th when Ryanair went in and did a massive deal with Boeing for some 737s. And that's what kind of saved Boeing. So I think this order is very, very important for Airbus. I think it's a win both for Airbus and also for Indigo and the four airlines that will receive delivery of these aircraft. But then I also think it's interesting to see where these airplanes are actually going to be deployed. We see Wizz Air, which is obviously Eastern Europe, where there's still a growth market. And then the rest of the aircraft are going to be deployed over in the US, Chile, and Mexico. So other markets which are still growing. So interesting times.
Right. Let's look at it from a passenger's point of view. Do all of these deals possibly mean more expensive flight tickets?
Well, I mean, more airplanes means more destinations, more competition. And, you know, when you have an airline, you need to fill seats. And what the airlines are doing these days, and some of these airlines that are going to be receiving these aircraft from Indigo are defined as ultra low-cost airlines. So we are moving towards a trend where probably airline tickets are going to be free, and the airlines will make money on the ancillary revenue. So selling you like train tickets on board and duty free and things like that, and charging you to bring your bags on board. And that's how they're going to make their money. So we're moving towards that model. So I say more airplanes coming on the market. These people are going to have to fill the planes. And to do that, they're going to have to be creative. And they're going to have to do that with the passenger in mind and offer the passenger a good deal in order to fill the seat.
Interesting. The Gulf region now, it's still dealing with the fallout with Qatar and its neighbours. What would have been the state of play at the Dubai Air Show, do you think, if Qatar had been present there this year?
Well, it's, you know, the whole Middle East it's a difficult market. It's a very complicated market. A lot of aircraft orders there are very political. Obviously, the Americans have done their fair share of deals today with Boeing, with that massive order there coming in for Fly Dubai. But so have Airbus managed to keep the 380 going with Emirates. So it's a bit of a balance. I mean, Qatar, if they had been present, It would be interesting, but, you know, the Middle East is... the countries in the Middle East are not as friendly with each other as, for example, the European nations are, even though there's a lot of conflict going on in Europe at the moment now with the EU and Brexit and whatnot. So still two areas of the world which are a bit shaky. But, you know, there's still a lot of oil in the Middle East, and that obviously they have money, and they're trying to do as much as they can to sort of, I mean, Qatar is going to be housing the World Cup in 2022, so, you know, that's quite an important event. So they're trying to move away from the oil industry and bring in other things. And so, of course, you know, more airplanes that they have, more people they can bring in, more other businesses they can start, and sort of bring people there, not just for oil reasons, but also for other business reasons as well. So, you know, Qatar are obviously doing their bit, like Dubai's doing their bit, Saudi Arabia's doing their bit, but a lot of competition between them, and sometimes they're not nice about it.
OK, we're almost out of time, but one quick question. With all of these orders, then, are jobs at Boeing and Airbus safe for the moment, or are there headwinds coming for these companies in the future?
Well, I mean, obviously, automation, robotics, artificial intelligence is going to be play quite a major role in building these aircraft. So there will still be some jobs that will be eliminated, even though, you know, we have to build more planes.
Okay.
But I mean, interesting enough, Airbus actually have a factory in the US now.
Fabrizio Poli, I'm afraid we are out of time. Fabrizio Poli, aviation expert in Manchester. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you.
Now, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has discussed Qatar's isolation by 4 of its Gulf neighbours with the country's Emir Tamim Al Thani. It's Erdogan's second visit to Doha since the crisis began 5 months ago. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain and Egypt have all cut ties with the Emirate, accusing it of funding terrorism and fostering ties with their rival Iran. Qatar denies the accusations. The Emir says the blockade has had minimal economic impact on the country. Hassan Abdullah has more from Doha.
The leader of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, has said that the 4 countries that have placed a blockade on Qatar do not seem interested in normalizing relations. He has said that the negative impact of the blockade has been temporary and the economy has managed to recover. The Emir has said that work is underway to implement economic development projects that would help in what he called fortifying Qatar's economy. These include establishing areas for storage, developing logistics and introducing a number of food security projects. He said that it is reassuring that although the hydrocarbon share in GDP has fallen by about 1%, Qatar's growth rate has improved as the share in GDP from other sources has risen by about 5.6%. The government, he said, is not satisfied with it, and it will strive and continue and try and aim for higher growth rates.
Milan has some fabulous architecture and food, but if you're in the fashion industry, it could be quite a competitive industry over there. But Christine Pervalakis went to Milan to look at one Turkish designer who's making waves.
Milan has long been dominated by established brands such as Giorgio Armani, Versace and Prada, making it difficult for new designers to break into. But that's starting to change. Zeynep Güntaş is not Italian, but Turkish, and she's determined to be among those leading the pack. After working in Istanbul, Zeynep moved to Milan to study, and now she's put her name to her own brand.
I watch a lot, like the streets and the young generation, what they're listening to, what they're looking at. So social media is helping me a lot.
But launching her label hasn't been easy.
When you consider marketing, materials, prototyping, photo shoots, like the commercial part, PR, presentation, the final cost is around minimum like $70,000.
Brands like Prada, Versace, and Louis Vuitton don't actually make their money anymore by selling clothing. Their money spinners these days are fragrances, handbags, shoes, and accessories. Smaller designers, on the other hand, have to make creations that people are willing to buy at prices they are willing to pay, and finding a balance is not always easy.
MPM Fashion Agency is one such company looking to nurture new talented fashion designers like Güntaş.
We try to have designers that can evolve during the time. And
the digital revolution has changed the fashion industry. European online retail sales are expected to climb 11% over the next 5 years, hitting $273 billion in 2018. And the sales model many designers are now turning to is known as direct-to-consumer. That puts the product in the hands of consumers without the assistance of a middle supplier or retailer. With a surplus of talent in the fashion industry, many struggle to maintain a foothold. But Guntash is determined to master the business side of creating and selling a collection beyond the catwalk. Christine Pirovolakis, TRT World, Milan, Italy.
And if you have any stories you'd like our reporters to look into, tweet me at Azhar Sukri. And that is all we have from Money Talks for now from me and the team here in Istanbul. Thanks for watching.